Welcome to the All Together Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries, followed their instincts and own paths, and are now empowering others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting alltogether.show. And now, your host, Eric Satz.
This week's guest is one of my favorite persons on the planet. Amy Seigenthaler is the managing partner of DVL Seigenthaler, the Nashville office of global PR firm Finn Partners. She's also the only one I've ever known to let me pay my bills with butcher products. Of course, only to see them float away in the Nashville flood. It's kind of like the beef and chicken version of crypto wallet hacking. In any event, Amy is a great storyteller, one of the best. And I hope you enjoy the listen as much as I enjoyed hearing it firsthand.
This episode of the All Together Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
Amy Seigenthaler, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric Satz.
It's 8 a.m. here in Nashville. I have not done an 8 a.m. show before. Only for you.
Particularly, I was going to say, usually we're talking about 2 a.m., not 8 a.m.
No, that's right. But we're going to get there. We're not going to get there just yet. So Amy is a managing partner of one of the fastest growing, proudly independent global marketing communication firms in the world, Finn Partners. She started as a journalist out of Boston College and was the assistant to Ambassador Gene Kennedy Smith in Dublin. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit before eventually making her way home to help run the PR firm that her father had originally founded. And that's all really kind of interesting from a professional standpoint. But with the All Together Show, this is really about you do you, which is a core value for Alto. And so in your own words, who is Amy Seigenthaler?
Gosh, lots of people would have lots of answers to that. I think if I'm to define myself outside of the typical, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a pet lover, animal lover, I guess I should say, not just my pets. I'm a friend. But I think if I were to define what is sort of one of my sort of driving characteristics, I would say I, from birth, have been a problem solver. And, you know, there's this story that my mother has never stopped telling about me at the age of 1.5, doing this 100-piece puzzle and I could have choked myself, but she let me, you know, that was the 60s. So she just let me do this 100-piece puzzle. And the plumber came in and said, my God, like this child is doing this 100-piece puzzle and she's not even 2. But that has been, now that I look at my career, that's what I've always loved doing, is helping people solve problems and helping my family solve problems. And I'd say the other part of that, and I swear I'll stop talking here in a minute, Eric, the other part of that is with focus always on the positive. So I do have this ability to always think that things are going to get better. And even in these dark days of the pandemic, that's helped. So I'd say a problem solver. If you're looking for one word, which you didn't, but I'll give you one.
I'm going to give you 2 words, problem solver.
English major.
Yeah.
Which doesn't show well. Don't tell Boston College.
Journalism, not math. And actually reminds me of the episode of The West Wing, which I so dearly love, when Bartlett's running for re-election and he's in the debate with, I think the Republican candidate is maybe Richie, which could there be a more perfect Republican name for a candidate? I don't know. And he opens with, you know, something about 3 words or 5 words, and he uses the wrong number of words. And Bartlett's immediate response is, well, that's 3 words, not 5. But and it's just sort of like game on sort of thing. So that's kind of fun.
So game on, Eric.
Get,
I got the message.
Game on, Amy. So you were born in Nashville. You grew up in Nashville, but you've been around. Like, you have traveled. You went to school in the Northeast. You went to Boston College. I guess there's nothing better than beating Notre Dame for you all. But tell us a little bit about that time in Dublin, and why was that appealing?
Well, it was appealing. So just backing up a little bit, I was a journalist, and I was a crime journalist, largely covered courts and crimes for small papers up in Massachusetts. So I worked at the Dedham Daily Transcript, was my first job as a reporter, and then I moved over to the Salem Evening News in Salem, Mass, which my first story was about witches, about a protest of witches. So if you've ever been to Salem, you know that there's a huge witch community, probably Wiccan community. So that was my first. So it was a nice initiation. But after about 10 or so years of that, crime reporting's tough on the soul, particularly if you're a generally positive person, and courts. It's fun. It's fun. I mean, I love, in some twisted way, crime and all of that. But I decided to maybe seek another profession, and was looking at, my dad, as you mentioned, started a PR firm. So I was going to move down here to Nashville, back from Boston, to join PR. And then I got a call in the middle of the night on St. Patrick's Day from my uncle, John Seigenthaler, who was close friends with the Kennedys. And he was at a St. Patrick's Day party with Jean Kennedy Smith, who was John Kennedy's sister and just sadly died this year. She was the last of that 9 who died, who to pass. And she was ambassador to Ireland. And he called me in the middle of the night and said, she needs a speechwriter, and she needs what they called a special assistant in the State Department. Would you be up for it? And, sort of shaking out the cobwebs, I said, yeah, sure. I mean, who wouldn't want to be? And he said, would you like to move to Dublin and work in the State Department? And so it was appealing, first of all, because it fell right out of the sky, literally out of the sky, the opportunity. I went up the next day, flew up to Washington, interviewed with her, and thankfully got the position and moved to Dublin. Ireland our family's from Ireland. Despite the last name Seigenthaler, which is my born name, my husband's name. My husband's 100% Irish. His last name is Pierce.
He is very Irish.
Very Irish. And so I probably should take that name. And sometimes I do, just because Seigenthaler is 12 letters and not the easiest name to capture. But my family is largely Irish. It just so happens that several of the men were German, and so their names passed down. So I'd been to Ireland before. We have distant cousins there. It was this mythical place in our childhood growing up. So moving there was just a dream, period. Right. I mean, appealing, I think if you say to anybody, would you like to move to Dublin and live for 3 years? They would say yes. What I didn't know is I was arriving there really on the eve of the ceasefire with the IRA. And within a month, the IRA had declared a ceasefire, which was hugely historic. And it was really the advent. So it was the advent of peace in Ireland, an explosion of, the Irish have always been literary giants, but it was the era of Angela's Ashes, and, where Irish literature really took on a new life in the public domain. Riverdance was, Irish arts were just exploding. The Irish economy was exploding. They called it the Celtic Tiger. I brought all this to Ireland, and so it was appealing for them to have me there. So it really was like this Renaissance moment in Ireland, and I just got to be dropped right into the middle of it. I actually ended up staying for 5 years through the Good Friday Agreement. For those of you who don't know Irish history as well as I do, for obvious reasons, I had to learn it. That's when there was true peace in Ireland for the first time, brokered by Senator George Mitchell from the U.S. I was there through President Clinton's visits, which were phenomenal. I mean, it was such serendipity, and I'm happy to say I made the most of it. I wish I'd purchased a house there when, real estate real estate was, not exploding as much at the time, but I didn't. And so I still go there regularly. But it was to be involved in such a historic event in world history and to be really an eyewitness. I traveled everywhere with the ambassador. And so, for instance, we would go out west to these, dots in the road. And I remember one time she got a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and we were both there. And it was a messenger carrying a message from, and this is the west of Ireland, not Northern Ireland, carrying a message from Jerry Adams through the wilds of Ireland to our door. You think, my God, Jerry Adams was the leader of Sinn Féin, which is IRA's political party. So it was very dramatic. It was very, the Irish are so funny. It was fun. It was lively, parties and pubs, and, you paint it, it's there. And that was my life for 5 years. It was amazing.
That has to be just such an incredible experience to live through. And for anybody who watches The Crown, this new season sort of starts off right there, like in the at sort of the height of it all, when it's still war.
And when I arrived, that was, anyone who knows or works with the Kennedys know they have a reputation for doing what they want, and oftentimes they that's for the good of our country. And in this case, it was for the good of our country. Jean Kennedy Smith was told that she had to be the ambassador to Ireland, period, that she couldn't deal with the North, that was the consulate in Belfast that dealt with that, and the UK embassy. And I think that she was sort of looked at as a lady who lunches. She just kind of put her in there to have a few parties and have a nice time. And that wasn't her plan. And so she went to the North. It was quite controversial at the time. It wasn't, in retrospect, she did the right thing at the time. There was a lot of hand wringing, but she went to the North pretty regularly in defiance of her orders. And I went with her, and I was her bodyguard, essentially. And
boy, was she lucky.
I know. Eric knows me. I'm sort of I'm a 5'3" pacifist, who couldn't, I can kill a fly, but that's about it. But when we went initially in the early days of our time there, it was just like that. You had to cross through those border crossings. It was terrifying. It was really scary. And I think that there are parts still that are tough, but Northern Ireland is a completely different place now. It's booming, and in large part because of her intervention.
So speaking of strong-willed, exceptionally smart women, you come from a family of them. And so at risk of stirring the pot, why did you get the call in the middle of the night?
Well, there is a real reason for that, because I was available. I think that I think my Uncle John was looking for, so Beth, my sister, who you know well, was working. She was the president of Seigenthaler Public Relations, where I was going to begin to work and play a part. And I already had started, but I was new there. And Katie was a young mother and journalist living in Chicago. So she was employed as a journalist. And Maria is a musician. So she didn't really completely qualify for what Jean Kennedy Smith needed. So I think it just fell, he's going through his Rolodex and says, okay, which of the four? And luckily he had four to choose from, and one was available, but all of them would have qualified up. All of the, and everybody, I mean, that was the fun part. Everybody came over, the State Department, for any young people out there. Well, and that was 20 something years ago, but it's a great career, particularly if you're plopped into it like me, as opposed to have to take the test. But, they really do take care of American citizens overseas. And so it was a terrific way to see the country, truthfully. I mean, I was very fortunate, very fortunate. And so everybody came over and visited. And if I'd known you then, Eric, you'd had a place to stay, but we'll go back.
I would love to go back. Kate and I went to Dublin, I think, for our 20th anniversary and just had a fabulous time. So I would love to go back with you.
You flew Falcons, right?
We worked with the Falcons. Yes. Yes.
Flew them is not the appropriate word.
I mean, I know falconry, but I don't know what the active, like, sort of appropriate verb is for what you do when you let a falcon fly from your arm and then fly back. But
yours is better than mine. I'm sure. Work with is a pretty good guess.
So you come back after your father's passing and you join Beth at, is Katie there yet at Seigenthaler PR?
Katie was there already. So people ask Katie's the eldest, and then Beth is the boss. So Beth comes.
And anybody who knows Beth knows.
There you go. So Katie's the eldest, and Katie she still lives in Chicago. She's brilliant with words. And so she's the eldest. She had come in. My father died in 2004, very unexpectedly, and he died of leukemia. So Beth was left there with the firm to hold it up. And while he was sick maybe a couple of months, she had asked Katie to come in and help because she just couldn't handle all the editing and writing work that they had to do without my dad. So then she was there. And again, you should interview Beth at some. She didn't lose one client when he died. And this was back in the days of, people really wanted a white-haired man around the table. And Beth worked her fingers to the bone. And so Katie was helping her from Chicago, along with her team, some of whom Ginger Johnson, Ryan Witherell, who are still with us, Hunter Hodge. So about maybe 6 months into it, Katie and Beth started talking about Katie actually joining the firm. And I was working in Boston for a PR firm up there. And so they said, well, why don't we just ask Amy too? And she knows it. So they did. And it was irresistible, Tim and I had to move. I was living in Washington working for a Boston firm. So we had to move home, which was great. I was expecting twins. And so that's a good time to move home for anyone expecting twins out there. But yeah, we all came together officially in 2005.
I did not realize that you would have just arrived when we first started working together.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
When did you start Plum Good?
So we started Plum Good in August of 2004.
Yeah.
And I would say about a year later, we were working with you. And, while I was up all night trying to figure it all out from a marketing PR perspective, sending you messages at 2 a.m, I thought you were fucking crazy because you were responding right away. I'm like, what is this woman doing? How does that work? Do you sleep?
I've never been a huge sleeper. I love to take a nap. I would rather live than sleep. My grandmother had a saying, you can sleep when you die. And I think I took that to heart a little bit too much. Now, you have to remember, Eric, at that time, I had twins, right?
Yeah, no, I remember.
I still do. I still have twins. I had a top who was 18 months old and newborn twins. So I was probably up like with a bottle in one of their mouths, answering your texts. I guess we were on Blackberries then, but it was also so exciting. What you were doing was so exciting. And that's, going back to your original question, I love nothing more than working with somebody who believes in what they're doing and wants to create something. And you're fun. So it was fun and exciting, and it's one of the best professional relationships I've ever had, and subsequently friendships as a result, because you're always clicking on all cylinders, and that's what makes life fun and work fun for me.
Even when you get paid with butcher shop products, I guess.
Which end up floating. Do you want tell the story or do I?
Instead of a check, how about a steak? How does that work?
So Eric paid us with some steaks, Beth and me, and that was 2009, I guess, right?
That was about right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then we had the Nashville floods and all your freezer steaks floated away.
All our freezer steaks were in the basement. I call Eric. I said, I'm looking down into my basement, and your Plum Good products are floating around in the muck. The funniest thing, and I don't know if you even remember this, when you called me, do you remember the first time you called me?
I do not.
Okay, so I had you all had some promotion going, and I had used Plum Good for, $25 off or whatever. I'd used Plum Good. And then I hadn't used you again. So I get this call in my office, and Mary puts, it's Eric's hats from Plum
Remember
Good.
Mary. Yeah.
And so I answer and I say, Eric, hi. And I didn't know you, right? Look.
You thought I was calling to get our Plum Good tote back, probably. Where's that tote? Those totes are all over Nashville, by the way. But
I
anyway,
loved I love Plum Good. And I just started into it because I knew you were calling to say, like, why aren't you using us again? And I said, love it. I have twins. I can't see straight. That was my excuse all the time then. And still now, I can't see straight. I will use you again. And I just went into this long, like, please don't be mad at me. And you said, well, that's great, Amy. That's great. But actually, I'm not calling you about that at all.
Well,
he said, I'm trying to work with you. I said, oh. So
I was probably calling about the other thing, but made a quick pivot.
Probably, knowing you.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the thing that's, I think, different about me over the last 20 years is that I no longer feel the impulse to do that. Actually, I feel the impulse to do that all the time. I just suppress it better.
Well, it worked in this circumstance.
So, I think a lot of our listeners are either entrepreneurs, founders, or they're trying to figure out, do they want to invest in an early stage business, an early stage company? And, those who operate in them and live them know that it's really hard. It's really tough. So now you come back and you're working with your sisters, and, the PR business is sort of 24/7, 365. What was the toughest part of that period in time? And you have 3 kids. Holy smokes. You're crazy.
Right. And that was tough. For any, particularly women, but also men who are parents out there who have young children and are trying to run a business or start a business at the same time. The way I looked at it, and I still believe this, even though, mind you, there were days when I'd say, I'm abandoning my children and I'm leaving them with the daycare. But what I've seen as they've grown up, they're now 16 and the twins are 14, is that if you really love what you do and have a passion for it, and sort of it's part of who you are, then that experience for them, for my kids, and that's who I was, and I am, and that experience is additive to their growth as opposed to detracting from them. They know you're their mother and father. And if they get what they want to see, is they want to see you alive and active and passionate. They don't. And so I look at them sometimes and I see them passionate about projects in school. And I think, I know where that came from. And their father, of course, Tim, who has enough passion of his own. But it's not, working hard is a good thing. And I hate to say that I think that work-life balance is overrated, because I know that that's really important. And
I think it's so overrated, by the way. I think of it as a seesaw. I think if you have 2 people on a seesaw, very rarely are they like this.
Right.
It's like this. That's how I think people ought to approach work-life balance, is to, at some point your profession's up here, and at some point your personal life is up here. Rarely are they like this.
Right. And today I agree with you. And I think today, particularly, maybe, 50 years ago, it wasn't as easy to have that personal life. But today, I think with technology, et cetera, and companies are realizing that they've got to give people time for their personal life. It's easier to, when you have, I mean, for instance, in our company, if somebody comes into a personal crisis or a personal need, we're not watching the clock. So I think work-life balance, or whatever we want to call it, the seesaw, which I like, the work-life seesaw, is easier to maintain today than even when we started work, Eric. But I do think that particularly women, I think, beat themselves up about, I'm not spending those formative years with my children. Number one, you are, and you're probably better off for it working and doing something you love rather than sitting there and watching them put food in their mouths. Friends of mine who are passionate about being stay-at-home mothers, share that passion with their children. But I shared the passion that I have for my work, for my children. But back to your question. So I think for all of us, all the sisters in our business are mothers. So Beth and Katie, that's all been a challenge. But the biggest challenge, and probably a similar challenge that a lot of people are going through today and now, in 2008, when the bottom fell out of the world, which we all remember well, that was probably, it was scary. And I think that, back to, who I am, the problem solver, 2 words. No, I'm not sure about that. Are you sure problem solver is 2 words?
I'll give you a hyphenated 1 word.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm gonna Google it while you're talking. How about that?
Thank you. Back to that, when it's harder to solve problems when you also are in crisis, to solve other people's problems when you're also in crisis. And no company really was not in crisis at that time, when it really felt like the world was coming to an end. We all remember it, or anyone who was working at that time remembers it. And I get a lot of support from the people with whom I work. And I think that if you're driven by always doing the best by them, even if you have to make cuts and layoffs, if you're driven first by that and not by the bottom line necessarily, you're going to end up okay. We did not have to lay off anybody at that time, thanks to a big client coming in. I mean, it was fortuitous, but we also sort of gathered around the table and said, and we're honest, and that's what I mean by doing right by them. We were honest about what lay in store, what could lay in store. And I remember Mary, who was our receptionist, she came in, and I could cry about it still. She came in and she had pencils, and she said, and she had sharpened them. She said, I sharpen. We do not have to buy more pencils and pens. You reuse your pencils and pens, sharpen them down to the nub, and then we'll buy more. She was looking for ways, and everybody was looking for ways to conserve paper. I mean, it was down to that. And that, I think that if we had ended up having to do layoffs, I think that I would still be friends with those people now because of the way that we collectively approached it. And really, Beth's such a leader, and she set the tone. Katie and I folded in, and the rest of us followed. But hard times are hard, and you have to be honest about them, and also, optimistic but realistic.
I love that. Optimistic but realistic. And by the way, the work-life balance thing and the seesaw, I think too many people think of work-life balance at a point in time. And actually, you should think of work-life balance, in my opinion, as a period of time, over a period of time. So to use an accountant's analogy for those who are listening, a balance sheet is a point in time. A cash flow statement tells you what happens over a period of time. And I think of work-life balance over a period of time, not at any one given moment. And that's where the seesaw comes in. So I don't want anyone to misconstrue, by the way, my comment about Beth as the boss And so I want to take you back to
I
Boston
actually said
College.
that.
No, I know. But then I said, anyone who knows Beth knows she's the boss. And I mean that in the absolute best way. And so I want to take you back to maybe one of your first days at Boston College in a big lecture hall class. And I think Tim may be sitting in that class too. I can't remember that part of the story, but I'd like you to share that story, if okay, with a professor sort of taking roll call, if you will.
Yes. And Beth, if you're watching or listening, you know that Eric raised this subject, not me. But it's a great story. And in some ways it says something about Beth, me, and Tim, honestly. So Tim is my husband, and we were friends at Boston College first. I met on our first day, as I'm about to tell you, and we didn't get married till 16 years later, which is a whole nother story. But we were great friends, but we didn't know each other the first day in college. And I had come from St. Cecilia Academy in Nashville, Tennessee. Our family's been here since right after the Civil War, both sides of the family. So we know a lot of people in Nashville. St. Cecilia, my graduating class was 40 people. So it was
all girls,
all, some related. So it was a very, even though Nashville, and particularly now is a large city, it was a very sort of parochial childhood and growing up, which was wonderful. But I wanted to go somewhere where I was anonymous, largely anonymous, let's say. But because I followed my sister Beth to Boston College, she was a senior and I was a freshman when I arrived there, and going to Boston and a different part of the world, really, particularly in that time, we didn't jump on planes all the time and go everywhere. It was so new. And so I was majoring in communications. And the first class had more. It was called Intro to Communications, and it had more people in it, probably about 100, maybe 75 than my whole high school graduating class. And so I'll go in. It was taught by a professor named Dorman Picklesheimer. And Dorman Picklesheimer was this huge sort of foghorn leghorn personality from Kentucky and had never lost his Kentucky accent. And so I'm sitting there anonymous in this class, don't know anybody in the class around me. And he starts doing roll call. And so he's going, Jane Appleby, he goes through the A's, B's, C's, all the way down, everybody here, 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 goes through this whole list, here, 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 here. And then he gets to the S's. And he says, Amy Seigenthaler? I say, here. He said, Amy Seigenthaler? Amy Seigenthaler? You couldn't by chance be related to Beth Seigenthaler? And I said, yes, sir, she's my sister. Class, let me tell you about Beth Seigenthaler. Beth Seigenthaler is the best communications professional who has ever come through my class. Beth Seigenthaler, I tell you, if any of you rise to the rank of Beth Seigenthaler, you have done well at Boston College. You have done well. Beth Seigenthaler, I am proud to have a sister of Beth Seigenthaler in this class. Welcome, Amy. And when you gotta be kidding me. And Tim, my future husband, is sitting right next to me. Little did I know. And he said in that moment, he and the rest of the class all turned to me and just see, like, who is this kiss up? Who the hell is she? So that was my first day. So yes, Beth is as amazing as professed, and she really is, and I am so grateful every day, and it's the truth, every day. I would say, like some people do, I wake up and say my prayers and thank God, but I'm not that organized. I'm not that organized in prayer, but somewhere back here, I am grateful every single day to work with her and with Katie. It couldn't be a better. And I think the reason it works, and this is sort of as people are thinking about sort of their partners and who not life partners, business partners, because we're business partners and, obviously siblings. Why it works is because each of us bring a different strength to the partnership, and we respect those strengths. And so Katie, as I said, is a brilliant writer. It is a rare day that I'm going to get in an argument with Katie over some either turn of phrase or approach to a pitch, a media pitch or a op-ed or something like that, because she is really the lead there. Beth is an amazing strategist and business strategist. My dad said at least one of them knows about money. Thank God one of the four understands money, and that's Beth. I'm not going to mess with that, right? I'm not going to get in. And I tend to be more of I'm really good at account service and solving problems and working with our teams and helping develop them. They don't really get in the way of that. So it works because we all know each other's strengths and respect them and sort of let one take the lead.
As a group, as a team, you have now been through 2 mergers. So you went from Seigenthaler PR to DVL Seigenthaler to now Finn Partners. What were those transitions like?
The mergers first, I think people always think they're going to be easier than they are. Period. It's just like when you hire somebody, you think if they're coming in and getting acclimated is going to be easier than it is. Everyone, I'm sure there's some doomsday people there. I've already sort of professed that I'm very positive about things. So I was expecting it to be easier than it was. And it was easy in terms of the logistics and sort of the personalities involved, which was a good thing. Finn Partners is an amazing company started by a man named Peter Finn, who is, and again, back to your point, it's an independent PR, PR firm agency. We have 19 offices around the globe. It's grown largely through acquisition over the past 10 years. We were one of those acquisitions. Peter started his firm with the motto, work hard, play nice. And that was really, he leads with what is right for the people with whom I work. And it's phenomenal to see how when that's your philosophy and it's really your philosophy, how well that works. With the acquisition, some PR or lots of acquisitions, they come in and they replace the management and sort of clean house and start over. What he said to us is, look, as long as you're doing well, you're great. I'm not here to get involved in your business, meaning, in your day to day. So fortunately, DVL and Seigenthaler were both doing really well. We merged here in Nashville. Seigenthaler moved into DVL's fancy office in the Gulch, and we didn't have any client conflicts, which was remarkable. And DVL had always been a sort of lauded creative shop, and our expertise was really in strategy, media relations, community relations. So it was a perfect fit. But their culture, where it came down, where things were hard, were just some cultural differences, and things that you don't even know matter to you until something like DVL had this wonderful tradition of a bowling tournament, and we're not bowlers, right? And so it was like, and it was so great. And we did it. And we actually, this year, obviously, because of the pandemic, we haven't. But it was so interesting to sort of say, how can we, it seems silly now, but can we adjust to bowling? It was so, but it matters. That matters to a culture and the way you approach clients and all of that we had to sort out. And the reason it worked, and it worked really well, is everyone was open to change. And sort of we went into it, and I remember Nelson Eddy, who is one of our partners on the DVL side, he said, as we were sort of talking through the whole thing, he said, remember, guys, this isn't going to be easy. And here I am going, oh, yeah, well, we're all, and he was right. And we're all still there. And we're all friends and partners, and we work really well together because we said, okay, we're going to make this work. And it's going to be tough a little bit, but we're going to make it work. And the firm is very different from it was 5 years ago when it was acquired, but it's strong. It's much stronger as a result.
Do you have a specific industry focus? And I'm not talking about Finn right now. I'm talking about Amy Seigenthaler. Is there an industry that you love to work in, or are you really just sort of a generalist?
Not surprisingly, because of what I've said about myself, the thing I love most of all is crisis, and the 2 a.m. in the morning call.
This is a perfect time for you, Amy.
Exactly. And I've been really busy as a result. But I do because, and I think it's when you get to a certain point in your career, or at least in my career, when you're helping a client through crisis, there is no room for error. You have to be top of your game. And a client isn't on the other end of the phone saying, can you think about this and get back to us in a couple of days? They're saying, what do I do now? I need help now. I need a statement now. I need a strategy now. And so you have to be right there with them. As I said, top of your game, clicking on all cylinders, and you got to give them an answer, and you really have to give them the right answer. And so that comes from a lot of years of doing that. But I also think that I was sort of wired for that anyway, from a young age. So I love crisis in any industry. The industry in which I work and where I've really found a home is healthcare. And we have 4 practice groups at DVL Seigenthaler. We have health, which, as you can imagine, is particularly now booming.
On fire.
And in Nashville, which is the center of health services, we couldn't be busier. And it's really wonderful because, to your point, people really need help. Then we have corporate and consumer, which are really melded into one group. But, we represent Bridgestone, Jack Daniels, we've represented for 25 years, all these great consumer and corporate brands. And then we also do a lot in government and the environment is our 4th practice group. So I work with all of those groups. That's my job at DVL Seigenthaler Finn. And so I work with the practice leaders. But where I'm really engaged primarily is in the health accounts. And I think that is because when I first, science and math and all of that was never sort of my lead. I did fine, but that wasn't my lead subject. But when I was at a Boston firm, they put me in charge of their science and technology group, and out of the blue. And so I had to learn it. And I quickly realized that you don't have to that for health particularly, it's all really about that, as my husband would say, Joe Bag of Donuts out on the street, right? The person who is the end user. And when you realize all the things that healthcare companies are doing to change the lives of people on the ground and start putting that together, it really is an inspiring area in which to work. And so that's where I really spend a lot of time. And I love health. I love health. And I love crisis in health, obviously. So give me a health crisis, I work all day long.
Do you have a favorite professional moment over the last 30 years?
And this has nothing to do with health. This is so obscure, but really I have to say this is my favorite professional moment and you'll know why when I say it. There was a gentleman who was in prison in Uzbekistan, and he was a political prisoner, and his children live in Memphis. And because of my work in the State Department, they contacted through various channels. They found me and wanted my help to get him out. And so that's not, I don't have a lot of experience in, Eastern European politics, but I do have a lot of experience in media relations and getting stories placed. And I got a New York Times feature on him, among other things, in a feature on him in the New York Times. And as a result, some Congress people started to pay attention, and he was released and came home. And so that really, it's sort of like,
that's hard to beat.
It's a pretty good story. There are a lot of them, but really that one is the one where when you say, okay, I helped save lives, he was being tortured in a Uzbeki prison and is now home in Memphis. So that was a big event.
I want to come back to kids and parents. And, especially for listeners out there with young kids, I mean, they are paying attention and they are sponges and they see it and they know it and they take it all in. And I still remember the Plumgood days where there was a big festival and you came to the festival with the twins in the double stroller, and my kids were running around with like Plumgood signs and gifts, telling people to buy food from Plumgood. I mean, they're always listening. They're paying attention. They, for better or worse, it rubs off. And so that's sort of a moment in time that I won't forget. And if you're ever wondering if your kids are paying attention to you and what you do and your life as an entrepreneur or whatever it is you're doing for your profession, they are definitely paying attention.
I remember that day. I think my mother was with us too, wasn't she?
She was with you.
Yeah, and she's still with us. She is sequestered in her home. We may not see her for another 5 years, but she's with us. My dad was an entrepreneur. My dad started his company, or I should say our dad started his company when we were very young. And it was first an advertising agency, and it evolved because he was a fine artist, meaning he was an artist, but he also obviously knew he needed to make a living. So he started an agency where he could use his art to make money. And so, and that eventually evolved into a PR firm. But he was 40 maybe when he started his company. And when he would take us down, because we're 4 girls within 6 years. So, and I guarantee my mother, who also ran a kindergarten, she was an entrepreneur. She ran a kindergarten in our house. I'm sure on Saturdays, like I am, like I can't keep these girls another second. So he would take us down to his office while he was working in his agency, because of course, as we all know, you're working around the clock. He would take us down to his office in downtown Nashville. And we still have these pictures of the Xerox machine where we would put our heads, I'm sure it's the brain damage as a result, but we would put, these pictures of our noses smushed up, and we had and of course, he had these big drawing, back then it wasn't computers. It was the big drawing pads. There's a name for it, but so we would be there with markers, and we would be, up in this building and looking down on the streets of Nashville. I mean, the memories of that are some of our best memories as children. And he was getting his work done, and we were involved in it, right? It's just like your kids running around with Plumgood signs. And so it goes back to what I was saying, like number one, they're absorbing a really important lesson, which is hard work. I am convinced that the young people of today need to realize that what a value hard work is, because there's this, again, back to the work-life balance. So much of that has been drilled in their head. Like, I really need to still have time to hike. You'll have time to hike, but working hard and coming in and really feeling not just passion about what you're doing, but pride when you've done it. There's nothing better. And also frustration when you can't get it done, but then pride again when you figure it out. There's nothing better. And so kids absorb that too, right? They see, me on the computer at night and trying to figure out a problem. They sell it. One of our clients, of whom I'm most proud and I work really closely with, is Meharry Medical College here in Nashville, which is an HBCU. And the president is James Hildreth, who is...
Can you say what HBCU is for the listeners?
I'm sorry. Historically Black college and university. So others are Howard, Morehouse. Meharry there are many around the country. Meharry is the largest medical school. So it's the largest HBCU medical school. So James Hildreth, who is a researcher in infectious disease, leads Meharry. And so during this time of pandemic, we've been for obvious reasons, getting him out there, promoting his points of view. He has a lot to say about the pandemic that's very important. And he's been interviewed on national TV, et cetera, has been tapped by professional sports teams to advise them on opening up. He's been really a great resource for the city of Nashville, but also the country. So the other day, he was tapped by the Biden administration as a possible member of the transition team. So he submitted his resume and is in talks with them. Well, it's on the front page of the paper, and my kids come down for breakfast and they're dancing around the kitchen. Dr. Hildreth's going to be in the Biden administration. Because they know Hildreth because of my work, and they know how much I love him and Meharry. And so they're excited about that. And so think about that, the boost to see the result of my work, and to then somewhere in the back of their growing brains, it sinks in that you do hard work for something and things happen. And so I think that back to your point about what they absorb, not just sort of the fun. I mean, we never felt like we weren't with our dad. And he was gone. I mean, he worked until 11 o'clock at night and was out the door at 7 a.m. and at the office. Because again, there were no computers, right? So he had to be there. And we never felt that he was an absent father, ever. A lot of times because he brought us down there, but he also about it.
Besides making me cry, the story reminds me of, the saying that luck is the intersection of hard work and opportunity. And that just sort of speaks to that right there. So, I had you fill out a questionnaire before you came on the show. I ask about a time that maybe you weren't being you. And you say it was in high school and college sometimes until it just absolutely exhausted you. What changed?
I think for a lot of people in their formative years, like high school and college, and there was so much less sort of talk at that time about be you, right? I mean, I don't know about you, Eric, but I was never told, just be you and people will accept you and don't bully each other. And all of this this wonderful sort of self-awareness, particularly girls get today about, you be proud of who you are and don't be, that wasn't part of the lexicon then. And so, you're just sort of trying to sort of wade through it. And I was in, as I said, a small girls' school. Friends are really important, so you try to adapt and be like they are. And I was never, and I still am not a big party person. I love to have parties. I love to throw parties, but meaning like go to a bar and with a ton of people and just sort of that sort of sweat and heave and, and get really drunk. It just wasn't my thing ever. And I tried that, right? And I tried to be more of that. And Boston College is a real party school. And so I tried that and it just didn't fit. Somewhere that something's not fitting in your skin. And it just wasn't my thing, but that's what a lot of my friends did. And so I tried to adapt to that and be this sort of party person, I guess. And, I really would much rather have stayed home and read a book, but I wanted to be that sort of definition of what a high school and a college student, that traditional American high school and college student. Then, and this gets to why I essentially threw it out. And I pretty much threw it out pretty early. And I think it was because I think traumatic experiences shape people. And, it's back to, as hard as things are, there always is something that can come out of it. And so I was studying abroad in England, in Canterbury, England, in my junior year in high school, and was again trying to, it was this, English colleges are like American colleges, trying to sort of do the the college, get drunk and party and all of that stuff. And my grandmother back in Nashville was killed. She was actually murdered by a transient who came through Nashville right before Christmas. And that was, to say the least, traumatic. And I came home, and it was obviously devastating. I mean, it changed our whole life in a day. It changed the trajectory of our entire family. And at that time also, there wasn't this big emphasis on therapy. I mean, I think back and I think, God, all of us should have just been thrown right into a psychiatrist's office, but we weren't. And so I went back after my break, I went back to England alone, and, carrying this from a couple of weeks before with me. And that was when it was just the awareness of this is maybe, who knows, I may have been depressed and I didn't know it, but something, I just said, to heck with it, right? I'm not going to be anybody but who I am. I'm not. And part of it, I think, is my grandmother, whose name was Mary Catherine Strobel, was always who she was. Always. And I think that was playing in there. I think that also it was just so exhausting to try to be this thing. And since I was probably already exhausted and so sad, it was, I'm going to be, take them or leave them. If my friends don't want me, if I'm not going to, I can't do it anymore. And really, it was so liberating from that point on. When I returned to my senior year at Boston College, that's where I truly made my true college friends, because I found people like me, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who don't want to be doing that in college. And it sort of helped shape the rest of my life, because take me or leave me. And if you think I'm goofy, or if you think I'm, too liberal, I mean, all the different things I've been called my life, fine, But it was pretty early, honestly, considering I know some people go through that much later in life, but it was pretty early, and it was because of a really traumatic event.
And then I asked one thing you wouldn't change about yourself. And you said the ability to laugh even at the toughest times. And that is so true about you. And I think that's a special characteristic. It's a special quality. I wish we could all do that, is find some silver lining of humor in life, even when there doesn't appear to be one.
Yeah.
And the ability to take a step back, but that ability to have that sort of humor, that release from humor, even if it's dark humor, like is a special ability. So I want to end, if you don't mind, with the following, because if anyone goes to Finn Partners and looks up Amy Seigenthaler, there's sort of a short bio and a long bio. And the short bio says, live small, educate big, travel often. What does that mean for you? Where did it come from?
Well, it came from a friend of mine named John Doolittle, who is Greek heritage and grew up in Australia and lives here in Nashville now. And he is a very wise person. He's about our age. And he said that to me a few years ago. And I thought, that's it. Live small, meaning this acquisitive world in which we live. I think we all, particularly and this was long before the pandemic, but I think we all in the pandemic, or a lot of us, have realized how little we actually do need, and really what is important. And I went into Target, I guess it was before the pandemic, because I don't remember. I don't think I've been there since, and I remember just walking around, and if you open your eyes, and I think so many of us live in a cloud. But I opened my eyes and I thought, this is actually sort of disgusting. It's just it's new ways to make a basket, new ways to make a candle, new ways to, and it's really there's something that really sort of drives you. Oh, I need a new candle. And I have 50 candles in my house, right? And so I think that live small, it's really a practice. It's not something that you just do. But some people may do it by human nature. I don't. I have to remind myself all the time and ask myself, do I need it or do I want it? I used to ask my kids that when they were little, and now I ask myself, do I need it or do I want it? Because we really don't need a lot. And the more I throw away, the happier I am, or donate. So live small. What was the second one?
Educate big.
Yes, that one. I mean, education's everything. And it's almost a cliche, but I actually think in this day and age, people are forgetting that education is everything. And I don't mean just reading a lot of books, even though I endorse that wholeheartedly. Read as much as you can, whether it's on an e-reader or, like I like to do with a hardback or paperback book. But learning, asking questions, being curious, one of the biggest, after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people in my life for jobs, the number one asset that I look for is curiosity. Because if you're not curious and you don't say, I wonder why that is, you're not going to, everything stays at the surface. And when we stay at the surface, that's where trouble happens, because you're making assumptions about things. You're making assumptions about people. So an education of your personal education, not all of us can go to Harvard. I didn't, that's fine. It doesn't have to be some lofty university. Take learn something that you haven't learned before. Go somewhere you haven't gone before. Live somewhere you haven't lived before. I think that that's critical, to get out of that comfort zone and educate yourself about what the rest of this world is like. And that obviously leads into travel often. I mean, how many people on their deathbed say, I wish I'd had another candle, right? They say, I wish I'd gone to fill in the blank or visited such and such. And that, I traveled. And it's interesting because my parents, I so admire them because they didn't have they grew up relatively poor in Nashville, and they didn't have the benefit of travel. They traveled through their mind, which is that educate part, but they were determined that we would travel physically as well. So the first time I went abroad was through some school exchange when I was a junior in high school. And to see France, it was in France. I didn't speak French, and I still don't. To see that and experience that as 16 years old was just eye-opening. But also to go to, Arkansas and experience that when I was 10 years old is eye-opening. So getting out, traveling, seeing, asking, all of those attributes are so important. And the stuff is the least important. Keep that small. Everything else go big.
Amy Seigenthaler, thank you.
Thank you.
It was my absolute pleasure. All the best.
You are the best, Eric.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto knows that the public markets offer insufficient diversification of retirement accounts. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective for anyone to invest their tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives. Assets like real estate, VC, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's 21 platform partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com.